What a great way to end the story arc. The Reign of Terror episode 6 was thoroughly entertaining. A really spectacular way, not only to end this particular serial, but to end the first season of Doctor Who in general. Maximilian Robespierre, Napoleon Bonaparte. This is a very thoroughly entertaining 20 odd minutes of television here. I found the serial to be a thoroughly entertaining one, and I am more than looking forward to the next season of Doctor Who, whenever it airs. Yeah, I really like the Reign of Terror serial. Very solid overall. I wish episodes 4 and 5 were available, but nevertheless, I find it, and yet, yes, you can complain about the historical inaccuracy at the end here, but still, an extremely entertaining piece of work overall. I think the reason I really like this serial, and I said it before, is I just think it's the most interesting era with which to set one of these. Compared to the Marco Polo era could have been more interesting if they focused more on the palace of Kublai Khan, perhaps. I mean, the storyline's interesting, but just, aesthetically at least, it's the Himalayas, it doesn't necessarily, I mean, you can't tell because it's missing, but I'm sure it didn't necessarily seem like the Himalayas authentically. The Gobi Desert, and then the palaces seem to be, from the photographs, the most impressive aspects of the Marco Polo production overall, perhaps. And then the Aztecs, I mean, a lot of work went into that, but you don't necessarily feel like you've time traveled. The Reign of Terror, it's easy to imagine yourself in that society. We know a lot more about, historically, it's easy for them to piece together an era that was closer to 1964 than certainly the era of the Aztecs and Marco Polo were. A European city like Paris, it's easy to imagine, put yourself in the place of, what would I do if I was in the Reign of Terror era Paris, trying to escape from the guards. It's easy to put yourself in imagine yourself and interact with the creative scenario presented within the Reign of Terror for these reasons, I think. I'm going to read to you all about Maximilian Robespierre, who plays a central part in this serial and who was the main figure behind the Reign of Terror, it is considered by historians. Maximilien Francois-Marie Isidore de Robespierre, the 6th of May 1758 to the 28th of July 1794, was a French lawyer and statesman who became one of the best-known, influential and controversial figures of the French Revolution. As a member of the Estates General, the Constituent Assembly, and the Jacobin Club, he campaigned for universal manhood suffrage, the right to vote for people of colour, Jews, actors, domestic staff, and the abolition of both clerical celibacy and French involvement in the Atlantic slave trade. In 1791, Robespierre was elected as public accuser and became an outspoken advocate for male citizens without a political vote, for their unrestricted admission to the National Guard, to public offices, and to the commissioned ranks of the army, for the right to petition and the right to bear arms in self-defence. Robespierre played an important part in the agitation which brought about the fall of the French monarchy on the 10th of August 1792 and the convocation of the National Convention. His goal was to create a one and indivisible France, establish equality before the law, abolish prerogatives, and defend the principles of direct democracy. He earned the nickname the Incorruptible for his adherence to strict moral values. As one of the leading members of the Paris Commune, Robespierre was elected as a deputy to the French Convention in early September 1792, but was soon criticised for trying to establish either a triumvirate or a dictatorship. In April 1793, Robespierre urged the Jacobins to raise a sans-culotte army to enforce revolutionary laws and sweep away any counter-revolutionary conspirator, leading to the armed insurrection of the 31st of May to the 2nd of June 1793. Because of his health, Robespierre announced he was to resign, but on the 27th of July, he was appointed as a member of the powerful Committee of Public Safety. This allowed him to successfully promote a reorganization of the Revolutionary Tribunal, a war cabinet, and worship of a supreme being. Those who were not actively defending France, moderatism, became his enemy. During the Reign of Terror, at least 300,000 suspects were arrested, 17,000 were officially executed, and perhaps 10,000 died in prison without trial. Although Robespierre always had like-minded allies, the politically motivated violence that the Montagne faction often promoted disillusioned others. Both members of the convention and the French public eventually turned against him. According to Jeremy Popkin, he was undone by his obsession with the vision of an ideal republic. In the middle of the night, he and his allies were arrested in the Paris town hall on the 9th of Thermidor. Robespierre was wounded in his jaw, but it is not known if it was self-inflicted or the outcome of the skirmish. About 90 people, including Robespierre, were executed in the days after, events that initiated a period known as the Thermidorian reaction, and the left wing in the convention was decimated. A divisive figure during his lifetime due to his views and policies, Robespierre remains controversial to this day. According to Marcel Gauchet, no one divides France more than Robespierre. His legacy and reputation continue to be the subject to academic and popular debate. To some, Robespierre was the revolution's principal ideologist and embodied the country's first democratic experience, marked by the often revised and never implemented French Constitution of 1793. To others, he was the incarnation of the terror itself. This is very fascinating to me, the historiography around Robespierre as himself, some considering him one of the great villains of history and others maybe defending his reputation. I'd like to read this section out, Legacy and Memory. Robespierre is best known for his role as a member of the Committee of Public Safety, as he signed 542 arrests, especially in the spring and summer of 1794. He exerted his influence to suppress the Republican Girondins to the right, the radical Hébertists to the left, and then the indulgent Dantonists in the centre. Though nominally all the members of the committee were equally responsible, the Thermidorians held Robespierre as the most culpable for the bloodshed. The day after his death, Bertrand Barrera, a prominent member of the Plain, an opportunist who cooperated in the tyranny, described him as the terror itself. On that day, about half of the Paris Commune, 70 members, were sent to the guillotine. Meanwhile, 35 sections congratulated the convention. Some marched through the hall. On Furiot's proposal, the Revolutionary Tribunal was suspended and replaced by a temporary commission. On the 30th of July, Courtois took in custody Robespierre's books by Corneille, Voltaire, Rousseau, Mably, Locke, Bacon, Pope, articles by Addison and Steele in The Spectator, an English and Italian dictionary, an English grammar, and the Bible. Nothing about Richard Price or Joseph Priestley, who had influenced Condorcet, Mirabeau, Clavier, and Brissot so much. On the 1st of August, the law of the 22nd of Prairial was abolished. Fouquier-Tinville was arrested, and not long after, solicitors were reintroduced in the courtroom. On August the 5th, the law of suspects was disbanded. The convention decided to release of all the prisoners against whom weighs no charge. Between the 6th and 20th of August, Napoleon was put under house arrest in Nice because of his connections with Robespierre the Younger. Mid-August, Courtois was appointed by the convention to collect evidence against Robespierre, Lebas and Saint-Just, whose report has a poor reputation, selecting and destroying papers. At the end of the month, Tallien stated that all that the country had just been through was the terror, and that the monster Robespierre, the king of the revolution, was the orchestrator. According to Charles Barbaroux, who visited him early August 1792, his pretty boudoir was full of images of himself in every form and art, a painting, a drawing, a bust, a relief, and 6 physionotraces on the table. The eyewitness Helen Maria Williams, who worked as a translator in Paris, attributed all the grim events to his hypocrisy and cunning. She described him as the great conspirator against the liberty of France. She mentioned the forced enthusiasm required from the participants of the festival of the Supreme Being. For Lazare Carnot, this monster was above all a hypocrite. It is because he knew how to seduce the people. For Samuel Coleridge, one of the authors of The Fall of Robespierre, he was worse than Oliver Cromwell. In fact, a whole new political mythology was being created. To preach the ideals of 93 after Thermidor was to expose oneself to suspicions of Robespierreism, suspicions which had to be avoided above all others. Two contrasting legends around Robespierre developed, a critical one that held Robespierre as an irresponsible, self-serving figure whose ambitions generated widespread calamity, and a supportive one that held him as an early friend of the proletariat, about to embark on economic revolution when he fell. Robespierre's reputation has experienced several cycles of reappraisal. His name peaked in the press in the middle of the 19th century between 1880 to 1910 and in 1940. The laborious Boucher, as a democratic mystic, was producing volumes, 40 in all, in which the incorruptible rose up as the messiah and sacrificial being of the revolution. For Jules Michelet, he was the priest Robespierre, and for Alphonse Aulard, Maximilien was a bigot monomaniac and a mystic assassin. For Mary Duclos, he was the apostle of unity and Saint-Just, a prophet. Robespierre did not thunder like Danton or scream like Marat, but his clear, shrill voice enunciated calmly syllables that the ears of his listeners retained forever. And it is owned that, in this as in other things, Robespierre had a strange prevision of the future. As a thinker at least, as a seer, he made few mistakes. His reputation peaked in the 1920s during the Third French Republic, when the influential French historian Albert Mafiez rejected the common view of Robespierre as demagogic, dictatorial, and fanatical. Mafias argued he was an eloquent spokesman for the poor and oppressed, an enemy of royalist intrigues, a vigilant adversary of dishonest and corrupt politicians, a guardian of the First French Republic, an intrepid leader of the French revolutionary government, and a prophet of a socially responsible state. Francois Crouzet collected many interesting details from French historians dealing with Robespierre. According to Marcel Gauchet, Robespierre confused his private opinion and virtue. By making himself the embodiment of virtue and total commitment, Robespierre took control of the revolution in its most radical and bloody phase, the Jacobin Republic. His goal in the Terror was to use the guillotine to create what he called a republic of virtue, wherein virtue would be combined with terror. Robespierre's main ideal was to ensure the virtue and sovereignty of the people. He disapproved of any acts which could be seen as exposing the nation to counter-revolutionaries and traitors, and became increasingly fearful of the defeat of the revolution. He instigated the Terror and the deaths of his peers as a measure of ensuring the Republic of Virtue, but his ideals went beyond the needs and want of the people of France. He became a threat to what he had wanted to ensure, and the result was his downfall. Lenin referred to Robespierre as a Bolshevik avant la lettre before the term was coined, and erected the Robespierre Monument to him in 1918. The Voskresenskaya embankment in St. Petersburg was renamed Naberezhnaya Robespierre in 1923, but returned to its original name in 2014. In 1941, Marc Bloch, a French historian, sighed, disillusioned, a year before he decided to join the French resistance. Robespierrists, anti-Robespierrists, for pity's sake, just tell us who was Robespierre. According to R.R. Palmer, the easiest way to justify Robespierre is to represent the other revolutionists in an unfavourable or disgraceful light. This was the method used by Robespierre himself. Soboul argues that Robespierre and Saint-Just were too preoccupied in defeating the interest of the bourgeoisie to give their total support to the sans-culottes, and yet too attentive to the needs of the sans-culottes to get support from the middle class. For Peter McPhee, Robespierre's achievements were monumental, but so was the tragedy of his final weeks of indecision. The members of the committee, together with members of the Committee of General Security, were as much responsible for the running of the Terror as Robespierre. They may have exaggerated his role to downplay their own contribution and used him as a scapegoat after his death. J.C. Martin and McPhee interpret the repression of the revolutionary government as a response to anarchy and popular violence, and not as the assertion of a precise ideology. Martin keeps Tallien responsible for Robespierre's bad reputation, and that the Thermidorians invented the Terror as there is no law that proves its introduction. Many historians neglected Robespierre's attitude towards the French National Guard from July 1789, and as public accuser, responsible for the officers within the police till April 1792. He then began promoting civilian armament and the creation of a revolutionary army of 23,000 men in his periodical. He defended the right of revolution and promoted a revolutionary armed force. Dubois-Krantz described Robespierre as the general of the sans-culottes. Lazare Carnot, who took charge of the military situation, became the enemy of Saint-Just in the Committee of Public Safety and reversed several measures. Also, Barrera changed his mind. The voluntary guards and militant sans-culottes lost influence quickly in spring 1793. The revisionist historian Furet thought that terror was inherent in the ideology of the French Revolution and was not just a violent episode. Equally important in his conclusion that revolutionary violence is connected with extreme voluntarism. Furet was especially critical of the Marxist line of Albert Soboul. George Rood estimates that Robespierre made some 900 speeches in which he often expressed his political and philosophical views forcefully. The number could be exaggerated. According to McPhee, more than 630 times across 5 years he had lectured the assemblies or Jacobin Club about the virtues, but in the first 7 months of 1794 he made only 16 speeches in the National Convention, compared with 101 in 1793. Robespierre fell ill many times, in the spring of 1790, in November 1792, more than 3 weeks, in September to October 1793, 2 weeks, in February to March 1794, more than a month, in April-May, about 3 weeks, and in June-July, more than 3 weeks. These illnesses not only explain Robespierre's repeated absences from committees and from the convention during important periods, especially in 1794, when the Great Terror occurred, but also the fact that his faculty of judgment deteriorated, as did his moods. McPhee stated on several previous occasions Robespierre had admitted that he was worn out. His personal and tactical judgment, once though acute, seems to have deserted him. The assassination attempts made him suspicious to the point of obsession. There is a long line of historians who blame Robespierre for all the less attractive episodes of the Revolution. Jonathan Israel is sharply critical of Robespierre for repudiating the true values of the Radical Enlightenment. He argues Jacobin ideology and culture. Under Robespierre, he was an obsessive Rousseauist model moral puritanism steeped in authoritarianism and intellectualism and xenophobia, and repudiated free expression, basic human rights, and democracy. He refers to the Girondin deputies Thomas Paine, Condorcet, Daunou, Cloutz, Destout, and Abbe Gregoire, denouncing Robespierre's ruthlessness, hypocrisy, dishonesty, lust for power, and intellectual mediocrity. According to Hilary Mantel, he could not survive if he trusted nobody and could not work out who to trust. Georges Lefebvre believed Robespierre to be a staunch defender of democracy, a determined opponent of foreign war, a saviour of the Republic, and man of integrity and vision. However, the Marxist approach that portrayed him as a hero has largely faded away. Zhu Suetchin became famous by and large due to his 1994 book titled The Demise of the Republic of Virtue, From Rousseau to Robespierre. This work has attracted countless readers since its publication and is still being read in the People's Republic of China today. For Aldous Huxley, Robespierre achieved the most superficial kind of revolution, the political. Robespierre remains as controversial as ever 2 centuries after his death. To quote Colin Hayden and William Doyle, the editors of Robespierre, Cambridge University Press, 2006. That was probably more information than was expected or required or wanted. In any case, if you're so inclined, tune in next time for episode 1 of Planet of Giants, the first episode of classic Doctor Who's second season, and we'll be discussing more Doctor Who and less French Revolution in that case. Thanks again, my friends.